So I'd like to introduce Aaron Quint. He's here from New York. He's going to be talking about Sinatra, the framework within. And I just want to say a word about how Aaron got here. We tried something a little experimental with our program this year. I selected, in consultation with a couple people, about half the program and just invited people. But the other half of the program was selected by all of you, where we had people submit proposals and we put them up on a website, and all of you voted on who you wanted to see, and Aaron was one of the talks he selected, so I hope you like it.
I hope so too. Thanks. Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me okay? I can't really tell. Okay. Cool. So I got here yesterday to San Francisco, and I busted my nail during the flight, and I was thinking I could arrive here and be like, just EY help, but I don't know if that really worked. All right, that bombed. That was awesome. All right. Anyway, so like I said, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Was that a boo? Oh, woot! Yeah, woot. Cool. So yeah, we have certain things in common with San Francisco. We also have hipster dudes on fixed-geared bikes and expensive apartments and stuff like that. We do have bagels, so, well. Anyway, today I'm going to talk a little bit about Sinatra. And what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to talk about something specific that I care about Sinatra. I'm going to give a quick overview first. How many people have used Sinatra here in the audience? Okay, a ton. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to make the overview really quick and then get into the more fun stuff. So what is Sinatra? Sinatra is, the tagline is the classy web framework, but I'm going to kind of dispel that today. Not that it's not classy, but what it looks like is just something like that. It's a simple require Sinatra, you define a route, and all it does is return a string. So here we get / don't you hate pants, and so when you run that, it just looks like that, and you pull it up in the browser, don't you hate pants, awesome. It gets a little more complex than that. You can pull params in just like Rails, don't you hate whatever, don't you hate saxophones, yes. So then it gets a little more complicated than that. I'm going really quick, but I hope it seems like everyone's used it, but basically you require Sinatra, you define a get, you can define a content type just like Rails, return JSON, but really what you're doing, the important part is here, you define a route, you define where it goes, and then you return a string. Really easy. So it's pretty classy. But what's really cool, I don't know if all of you have checked out the latest Sinatra, but in the latest Sinatra, there's been a lot of work to reorganize the code and make it a little easier to make more interesting things. And one of the most important things that happened was it got organized into a base class, so the Sinatra base class. So defining apps, now you can define apps as a subclass of Sinatra default or Sinatra base. So here's a simple app. It's the classy app. I'm using Pat Nakajima's Rack Flash, which is just a Rack middleware for doing Rails-like Flash messaging. And here we're using the Haml helper to render the index and to return the message. And all we're doing is making the message a little classy. So it looks like this, just simple form. You hit submit, and you get a response with a Flash message. And I do say you look nice, quite, which is really classy. So anyway, it's really simple. I hope everyone followed that. I can go back a little bit, but there's the cool part here. You're enabling sessions. You're using Rack Flash. And the great part about this classy Sinatra is that you're encapsulating it inside of a class. It can be passed around. And you can define multiple classes and multiple apps like this instead of just having the old way, which was just you had a base file and you define routes in this file and then you just ran it, but you couldn't really encapsulate it in the same way. So really, really simple. That's the quick overview. I hope it made sense. But what I want to talk about today is that Sinatra is not a framework. And I'm not trying to diss, Blake or anyone, I think this is a good thing, and I want to talk about why. So when we think about frameworks, we think about Ruby on Rails, at least in the Ruby community. Usually that's the first framework that comes to mind. And what Ruby on Rails is a big set of libraries, classes. It's a specific directory structure. It's a specific way of really thinking about how we're going to write an app. And it kind of makes a lot of assumptions. DHH's main thing was, convention over configuration. So it makes a lot of assumptions about how we're going to write an app. And it's kind of like, a shelving unit where it has all the parts you need to really hold your code and put it in the right place, and it kind of makes assumptions about how you want to hold your things. A wooden board or a shelf, on the other hand, is not a framework, and that's what Sinatra is. It's kind of, it's just a piece of a larger puzzle. So I like to say that Sinatra is not MVC. It can be if you want it to be. You could write a Sinatra app and it could look almost like a Rails app, and you could define your routes and have your code separated into models, and your code even have a models directory if you wanted to, and run the app, and it could just look like a Rails app. But I like to say Sinatra is WNNSP, which is we don't need no stinking pattern. And that means that it's just really straightforward. You can do whatever you want with it. It's not going to make any assumptions about how you're going to organize your code or how you're going to even make the directory structure. It's just real simple, real straightforward. So then what is Sinatra? Sinatra is a library. And what I'd like to say is that Sinatra is a great web library. It's a library, a Ruby library for making web applications, and it's basically, really, if you look at the Sinatra source, it's mainly one file, which is really cool. And what that means is it's just, as a library, all it is a DSL for defining routes. So you're defining the route just like we saw before. You're returning a string, but that string can really be anything. There are helpers to do Haml and herb, but really it's just returning a string. It can be whatever. Those helpers just return rendered Haml or rendered herb. So it's also just a nicer rack. Rack kind of has the web library also has ways of defining routes too. It has its builder and it has its URL map, but it's a nicer rack. It's got a great API in a really great way, and the code reads great, and it looks sexy. So what I want us to do is to stop thinking about Sinatra as a framework. That was cool, wasn't it? Keynote. Yeah, that's awesome. So wait, we can do that again. You guys like that? Oh, geez, that's awesome. Okay. So the idea is I really want to remove the idea of Sinatra as a framework. Because when we think about Sinatra as like a replacement for Rails, or, oh, we're only going to use Sinatra to code apps like we code Rails. Oh, we want a web app. Oh, but it's smaller than Rails, so let's use Sinatra. And that's great. That works. I actually wrote a little generator that generates all the directories and does stuff like that called SinatraGen. You can check it out on GitHub. And that's great, and it's totally a way of thinking about Sinatra, and if you want to do that, I applaud you, and I think it is really good for making these tiny apps. But what I want us to think about Sinatra as is a different way of thinking about the application workflow and how we're going to build. So the way I've started to think about Sinatra is code first, then Sinatra. So what that means is we're all writing Ruby libraries, or a lot of us are, and writing Ruby gems, or just even internal code that maybe doesn't live inside a web app. But what we can do is have our awesome Ruby project, and then as a side note, oh yeah, it has Sinatra in it, and it can work on the web. So if we think about our big Ruby project, it's a whole lot of boards, but then there's like that one board that's the Sinatra app. And why we want to do this is, I think, it's really cool to think about HTTP as a language. And what that means is, it's a protocol, but it's a way, recently with REST and a lot of other conventions for programming HTTP, it's pretty cool to think about HTTP as a way of two apps or two distinct pieces talking to each other. The cool thing is Sinatra speaks HTTP, and that's what it does really well, and that's what it's really good at. Do you speak HTTP? Do your libraries that you've written, do they speak HTTP? Do they need to? It's up to you, but if you want to, Sinatra is the way to do it. And when I say speak HTTP, what I mean is there's one guy and he says get, and then there's another guy and he says response. It's basically just this back and forth of two modules or two distinct things doing request-response cycle. In our world, that can mean two things. There's the left side where we have the request is either a user or there's this great library called REST Client or NetHTTP. And on the other side, there's Rack, which is becoming the de facto standard for handling web requests. And Rails is now on Rack, and obviously Merb and Sinatra. So it's kind of this back and forth, and Sinatra is really good at handling this right side of it. What I also want to do is, if we think about the web, the browser as an interface. So for our Ruby code, we have our APIs, which are just our simple, our whatever it is, our method definitions, or it could be an API that exists on the command line. It's a really simple interface for defining how we pass stuff in and get stuff out. But the web, Hot Cocoa is awesome, and OS X is really great, and making making desktop applications is awesome. But the web is a little bit easier. Not only is it global, and not only is it not only are there really great standards that exist cross-platform, but we all kind of know it. If you're a web programmer, you probably know at least a little HTTP, and a little HTML, or whatever it is to get something in this browser window. Kind of know how to do that. So what I want us to think about is like the power of the local web. And what that means is our computers. It means the power of local host. It's our local computers and our local apps as kind of a way of creating this desktop, or a way of creating interfaces for us to interact with on our local machines. A great example of this is, this isn't Ruby, but CouchDB has this awesome thing. I don't know how many of you have played with CouchDB, but Matt's going to talk about it later. It's really cool, and one of the coolest things about it is that it just comes packaged right out of the box with this Futon application. And what Futon is just, it's like a much nicer PHP MyAdmin maybe. It's a simple way of viewing the documents in your system, of updating them, and doing stuff like that. And what I think is so cool about this is it's just embedded in CouchDB. It's just part of CouchDB. You start up CouchDB, you get this awesome interface, and you don't have to worry about passing stuff in on the command line, or doing some kind of crazy configuration with configuration files, or having its own console even. It's just the web. Obviously, that works really well for CouchDB because its protocol for storing documents is all based on HTTP. But if we go a little further, we can think about our own Ruby code. Like, let's say we work at Megacorp, right? And we have our this document processor. That's just this Ruby library we wrote. It takes in some kind of crazy comma-separated value document and spits out some sort of report. Yeah, it's great. It works on the command line, but when Jane in accounting actually wants to run it, she sends it to us, and then we have to run the command line, and it's a pain in the butt. Why not just give Jane, this really simple interface? It's the web. She kind of knows the web. She has a Gmail account. She's on Facebook all day. So it's really easy to just give them. Obviously, this is butt ugly, but you can clean this up and make it beautiful. And this is just this little Sinatra app embedded in our existing Ruby code. So with that said, my attempt is I want to get you guys, I'm calling all developers, require Sinatra. And what that means is you have your Ruby code already, just require Sinatra, make it a web app. Make your internal apps web app, make your gems web apps, make them simple things that may not exist on the global web, but on the local web. So what that means is you have your project, you have your lib with your code, here's all your awesome code. It's a lot of Ruby code that does a CSV processing or whatever it is, and then there's that one file, app.rb, and that's all Sinatra, and that's the only piece of the project that's Sinatra. So what does that look like? Well, the cool thing with this classy Sinatra is that we can really even have the app exist as a subclass of Sinatra default or Sinatra Base inside of our existing namespace. We set the root, we set the app file, we do something awesome when we get it. So a little while ago, I had this idea and I thought, oh wow, we could really, it would be really awesome if all these gems and all our code just came packaged with these web interfaces. So I started thinking about that, and one of the first things that came to mind was Ruby Gems itself. So Ruby Gems already kind of has the gem server interface. It's kind of ugly, but it does some cool things like handling, obviously, serving gems. But with Sinatra, I just wrote this little thing called Gembox, and what it is, it's a really simple interface for browsing your gems and looking at how beautiful they are. And really, all it does is it's 99% of the code is Ruby Gems. We're just using the Ruby Gems API to get this information, but then there's this little file that's Sinatra to actually do the serving of the requests and displaying the information in a nice way. So this is the actual file tree for Gembox. We have our app.rb, which is the actual Sinatra app, and then we have the gem list, gems, and the view helpers, which are just simple things. The gem list is really the main code, and all it is a really simple wrapper around the Ruby Gems library. But what the app looks like, and this is it's pretty small, but I took out a lot of the important stuff, obviously. But it's really simple. All we're doing is having including Gembox view helpers, which is just some simple view helpers to make the front end code a little nicer to read. And then we're serving requests for these gems and just doing those ... I just couldn't fit it on the screen, but all it is it's just calling Ruby Gems and saying, return me back some gem specifications, and then I'm gonna put them in this eventual response. But it's really simple. You can look at it. It's on GitHub too. I'll have links at the end. But basically, this app that we have here it's not that much, and it's not that much of an effort to include this in our existing code to just make it speak web. It's not like Rails where we're going to have to, if we were going to write a Rails app that speaks to our existing Ruby code, it would be a lot more overhead. And if we think about Sinatra as a library instead of a framework, we just have this simple, really simple app that's just a single file. And maybe it's some views and maybe it's some helpers, but really it's just this one file and it's not the assumptions in the directory tree. So in thinking about this, I had this idea I wanted to start writing these apps that are embedded in existing Ruby code. So the one challenge of that is how do you start them up? How do you do that? So I wrote this little thing called Vegas, not Las Vegas. I can erase it, but Vegas is it's what it is. It's just a super simple Sinatra starter. Say that 10 times fast. But it's right now it's just a single class. I have more ideas for it. I'll talk about that in a sec. But all it looks like is this. You have your bin file where you're requiring this is the actual one from Gembox. You have your bin file where you're requiring lib Gembox. You require Vegas, and then you have this little Vegas runner where you pass it the app and just a name so that we know so we can save PIDs and stuff like that. So the Gembox bin, instantly including Vegas, we get this awesome list of options, and we can add more options if we wanted to. But basically, it just allows you to run this on whatever rack server that you have installed. And basically, you type Gembox, and it searches for an open port. And then it daemonizes, saves some PIDs, saves a URL, and then just uses Launchy to actually launch it into a browser. So the idea is this makes it really easy to write these embedded apps, and then you can just have bin files that starts them up, and there it is. So quickly before the end, I want to talk about the future. So Vegas is a cool idea. I mean, it's really, right now it's just a single class, but I have some ideas for it that I want you to help me with. So what does that mean? Gems in Vegas as a distribution platform. And what I mean by this is if we have these kind of local apps that exist on our machines, wouldn't it be cool if there was a way to find all the gems that we have installed that have Vegas enabled so that, or Sinatra enabled so that we can easily search them on our local machine, or maybe have a local interface. Maybe Vegas has its own embedded Sinatra app that is displays all the available Vegas apps or Sinatra apps that you have running on your machine. Also, I've been looking into, there's this really cool thing called Rack URL Map. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but what it does is it allows you to mount multiple rack apps on a single in a single host or a single server. So wouldn't it be cool if you could start up Gembox or one of these other ones and actually mount it onto a single running instance of Thin or Mongrel instead of having 20 of them open. Also, in this idea of speaking HTTP, I had this thought of Vegas as a central brain where it can receive HTTP requests, it can make HTTP requests to kind of communicate internally on your local machine between this between these local apps that you have, sending messages, maybe growl, stuff like that. And then Ilya posted on his blog about using Sinatra for MapReduce. So wouldn't it be cool if we could have these little apps that we have and just easily distribute them, almost like a MapReduce framework or Hadoop or something like that, but just over HTTP and not over some specific protocol. So those are my ideas. I know I came early. I didn't have a lot of awesome stuff to show, but hopefully next time I come and talk, all this stuff will be done, and you guys will be like, whoa. But hopefully this gives you guys some ideas. What I really wanted to do is encourage the use of Sinatra as a way of making your app speak HTTP and making your little library speak HTTP. So that's it. My name's Aaron Quint. The code is down there. I have this code.quirky.com, which is my GitHub pages. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to ask them. And please come up to me and talk to me. I'm here in your beautiful city until Sunday, so I'd love to hack too. So cool. Thank you. Questions? No?
Early on, you showed handling sessions. Just include colon sessions.
Yeah.
Like that. Sessions are complex. Can you talk a little more how that works?
Sure. Well, what's really cool about sure. So he said in an earlier here. I'll actually just go back to the slide. But basically, in an earlier slide, I showed how I was using sessions in the app, and there we go, just set sessions true. And one of the greatest things, and he was asking, sessions are complicated, how does this work? So one of the cool things about Sinatra 2 is it's just a rack application, and so you can use these things called rack middleware. I don't know if a lot of people have experience with it, but rack middleware is this cool idea where basically they're just simple rack apps that handle the same call that rack uses, and then does some stuff and then passes it on to the next handler. So set sessions true is just a shortcut to including the rack sessions middleware in Sinatra. this use rack flash is I'm using the rack flash middleware. But basically, the sessions middleware is just it's just a cookie session middleware. But if you wanted, you could potentially write a middleware for doing database session stores or even more complicated, distributed session store or something like that. But yeah, the ability to include rack middleware makes these apps even more powerful because you're just kind of turning on this functionality with basically a single include.
I think Base is a really great idea. I'm just wondering if you thought through the security implications of opening ports on localhost all the time.
Yeah, I know it's not so secure, and obviously opening ports. Yeah, there's definitely some security issues with the idea of running code locally like this, and interfacing with Ruby code, especially. And I've thought about it. I haven't really tackled it yet, but there's definitely one of the cool things about running on localhost, though, is you do have access to just run stuff on the command line and do stuff like that, or open your editor even, or stuff like that through Sinatra, which is pretty cool. Obviously, completely insecure running arbitrary code on your local machine, but maybe there's ways around it if people have ideas of how to kind of maybe wrap stuff so that it's almost sandboxed. That would be cool too. So, cool. More? Nope. We're done. All right. Cool. Please. Oh, sorry. I think you got to talk to me afterwards. I think we're out of time. But thank you. Please come talk to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. So, cool. Thank you.